"We used to have to take the corpses out with a crane," he told me once, "because they were so intertwined. Entire pyramids of bodies, people climbing on top of one another, clawing each other to get away from the gas. They used to tell us it was a quick death, but everyone knew it wasn't. The screaming in the chamber would go on for 15 or 20 minutes. They used to put a little glass window in the door so the doctor could look in and watch." My grandfather, Alexander, had told me about his time in the Sonderkommando, the corpse units of the National Socialist concentration camps. He had been arrested in Poland simply because he'd been a leader in his field and an intellectual with a history of supporting Polish nationalism. This had raised red flags, and during a roundup of the intelligentsia, my grandfather had also been arrested and tortured by the Gestapo. They had made him sign something that he never got to read. Then he had been moved to prison and, eventually, to his new job. The day it happened, my friend Bartok and I were on duty. Our job was to lead the people towards the chambers without alerting them or causing a riot. The Sonderkommandos used lines like, "Don't forget where you put your clothes because you'll need to come back to them," or "Tie your shoes together for convenience to make it easier to find them when you come back." We always emphasized how they would come back after the shower, but I never looked them in the eye when I said it. He stared out the window for a long moment after this, his mug of coffee steaming in front of him. I knew not to interrupt him. He often talked to me about his experiences. It seemed like he wanted to draw poison out of his memories, and letting him talk seemed to help him do it. So the chamber was packed, as always. 800 people smashed into a tiny area, like sardines. To get the last one in, the SS would often beat and bludgeon people. The claustrophobia must have been horrifying. The lack of air, the packed chamber, like a massive coffin. By the time they slammed the door closed, there wasn't an extra inch of space into the entire chamber. In fact, after they opened the door, their bodies would often still be standing, because there was simply no room for them to fall down. Except for the middle of the chamber, of course. There, people lived the longest. They tried to escape from the gas. We would see infants and small children at the bottom of human pyramids, smothered and stampeded. The stronger ones would be at the top, having climbed over the bodies of others to try and get some air at the top of the chamber. The gas did have a tendency to fall, depending on the temperature and the humidity. When they opened the doors, Bartok and I walked in among the others of the Sonderkommando. We used long canes to pull the bodies out. At first, a Sonderkommando would treat the bodies with respect, but after tens of thousands of bodies, you just started throwing them like bags of potatoes. It was our job, after all. He said it with an ironic misery, his eyes getting misty. Bartok and I would then pile the bodies on carts as we brought them to the other teams of Sonderkommandos. One team, which we called the dentists, would rip out the gold teeth so they could melt them down into bars and send them back to Germany. Another would shave all the remaining hair off the corpses. They'd shaved them when they first got there, but any remainder would make the crematorium reek of burning hair. Bartok and I were moving our carts of corpses up the lift elevator when a commotion suddenly broke out in a nearby medical barracks. They called it a medical barracks, but in reality it was mostly a place where doctors experimented on people, where the sick were often given lethal doses of this chemical or that. This also wasn't a quick death, as the person would begin to get agonizing cramps and a burning sensation before devolving into unconsciousness. I had no idea what was going on. At first I thought the SS were trying to prevent a prisoner escape. Or maybe someone had already escaped and they were in an uproar. It looked like someone had kicked a hornet's nest. I saw government vehicles speeding in with fully armed troops. The guards surrounded the gates of the camp, a thick ring of black-suited soldiers. I saw a doctor running out of the barracks, blood covering his white lab coat. His eyes looked wild, and he screamed something in German to the soldiers. He kept screaming it over and over again. "Die, Wolfen! Die, Wolfen!" he said. Most of the Sonderkommandos, including myself, knew at least a little German. It was, after all, the administrative language of the National Socialist State, and the Germans never deigned to speak to us in our language, unless they were torturing us or trying to get information. By this time, Bartok and I had paused, a cart full of emaciated, naked corpses lying in front of us. The doctor ran past us, not noticing, his eyes wild. He continued to scream gibberish in German, speaking so fast I could barely understand anything except for two words: the girl and the wolf. "What the hell do you think that's about?" Bartok asked me, his blue eyes wide and uncertain. I just shook my head, feeling numb. I hadn't felt much of anything in months, to be honest. I had closed myself down emotionally, psychologically removing myself from the present. I saw much of this as if it were happening to someone else. In my mind, I think I was trying to protect myself. Even now, looking back, I feel like I'm telling someone else's story sometimes. A torrent of gunfire erupted from the medical barracks, and then a woman ran out. It was a nurse, and her face looked like a mask of gore. One eye hung limply from its socket, and her entire left cheek was hung down in ribbons, a flap of skin revealing the teeth behind, like some sort of grotesque half-smile. In her remaining eye, I saw mortal terror and fear. Seeing it coming from our captors loosened something inside me. Bartok felt the same way. We left our carts of dead and turned to run. At that moment, something tore its way out of the barracks. As I saw what it was, I began running with all the energy that my starving body could provide. It was a girl. At least, it had been. She looked no older than 12 or 13, and she wore a striped uniform, soaked in blood. Her arms and legs lengthened before my eyes, forming long claws that erupted from her fingers. Her mouth had formed into a strange rictus grin, with drops of blood falling from her sharpening teeth. Stringy black hair seemed to be growing from her head, and her eyes, they were turning yellow, with slitted demonic pupils gleaming in the center, emanating a bloodlust and fury that I'd never seen before. The SS guards and soldiers had streamed in from the front gate by this point, running at her and shouting orders. Automatic rifles began to fire, and Bartok grabbed my hand and pulled me down to the ground just in time. I heard bullets whizzing over my head, smashing into the crematorium chimney and the surrounding barracks. I knew they weren't shooting at me, but so many soldiers had opened fire that the entire area had turned into a shooting gallery. I looked back and saw bullets ripping into the girl's body. Gore blossomed from her chest, blood and flesh exploding out of exit wounds, covering the bare dirt around her. With a roar, she jumped on top of the barracks, leaping 20 feet into the air. To my amazement, I watched the wounds healing before my eyes. I wondered what kind of strange medical experiment this was that could produce such an effect. Bartok shook me, saying we had to run, we had to get out, but I just stood there, shell-shocked. He slapped me, pulling me up and towards the gas chamber. "We can barricade ourselves inside the chamber," he said. I gasped. "I'm not going to lock myself in there," I shouted, waves of anxiety rising in my chest. I had images of the door slamming closed and Zyklon B being poured through the vents. I shuddered, but we kept running towards it, not knowing where else to go. As we got inside the crematoria, the windows smashed inward, and I saw the girl had followed us. She'd completely transformed by this point. Her skin looked yellow and papery against the long, wolfish frame. Tatters of the blood-stained uniform still clung to her body. I saw no marks from where the bullets had struck her. She ran towards us, lashing out with clawed hands. Bartok pushed me just in time, and I fell, the claw missing my face by a fraction of an inch. I began to crawl away, looking back at Bartok as he began to cry out in terror. I looked and saw him backing away from her, his hands raised, pleading. "I don't want to die. I don't want to die," he kept saying. In a blur, she leapt forward, ripping at his throat, the bloody rictus grin still plastered across her face. A torrent of blood rushed out from the gaping wound, soaking the front of his body. She opened her mouth wide and drank the spouting arterial stream, sucking at it as she held up his body with her clawed hands. When she was done, she threw it aside and looked down at me. I had begun to rise, to jump up and run when she tackled me from behind. I felt a searing pain in my back as her claws connected, leaving deep gouges. I felt something sticky and warm flowing down my back, soaking into the rips in my uniform. At that point, a dozen SS men ran in through the front door and began shooting. I was on the floor after she had clawed me, which turned out to be lucky, as the bullets went right over me. Hissing and spitting blood, I turned my head at the last moment to see the girl galloping away from me on all fours, her freakish long arms giving her a lopsided stride. She jumped back through the shattered window she'd come in. The SS men all ran out after her, and I found myself alone with Bartok's body. I got up and found the rest of the prisoners confined to their barracks with armed guards watching each of the groups. The guards had left the front of the camp in a hurry, and I saw that the gates stood wide open. With blood pouring down my back, I began to creep through the shadows of the camp, checking the watchtowers and the front gates for people. They had all joined in the pursuit, or were with the confined prisoners in their barracks, and they had apparently forgotten about a lone Sonderkommando like myself. I finally made my way outside. I didn't see a single other prisoner or guard in the front, but when I looked back, before I left for the final time, I saw the girl leaping over the razor wire fence as countless soldiers pursued her. "Good for you," I said to myself. "Good for you." Good evening, everyone. It's me, Dr. Plague. Thank you so much for joining me for tonight's video. If you still feel like you could do with a little more spooky in your life, why not click on one of the videos that's appearing on your screen? If you're not subscribed, why not go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss any of the stories we put on here. I make new videos 7 days a week, and I wouldn't want you to miss a one of them. So if you'd like to support the channel, why not go ahead and subscribe? Maybe hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of the great stuff we do here. And of course, if you'd like to support the channel in a more financial way, you could always become a member on YouTube or on Patreon. Spooky Skeletons, that's my $5 members, always get their videos early, as opposed to in the evening. And we've got lots of other cool stuff that you can take advantage of. Just go down to Patreon and give it a look, or become a member on YouTube. Speaking of all of our wonderful patrons and YouTube members, let's go ahead and thank them right now. Thanks to Unicorn Hollow, our Spooky Ghost contributor, Thanks to our Spooky Skeleton contributors, Janice, Lee Kendall, and Saikat. Thanks to our Ghostly Reader contributors, Hi Stacy, Winter, Xaronan, Emily Coltsfoot, Stephanie Carrington, Tyler Parker, Cinnamon Fox, and Sarah Samar 42. Thanks, guys. We just couldn't do the show without you. Again, if you'd like to support the show in a more monetary fashion, there are links below to Patreon, and you can just go to YouTube and click on membership, if that's something that interests you. There's also links to my latest book below if you'd like to go have a look on Amazon. It should show you the other books I've got as well, so why not go ahead and get the whole collection? And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.